Hey everybody, this is Kyle here at Reviewr, and today I wanted to kind of record a quick little introduction into kind of managing an ARPA grant workflow and process from literally start to finish, powered by Reviewr. Obviously this doesn't just apply to ARPA grants, but really grants in general, but obviously with a lot of our clients in the county and the city space who are using us for ARPA grants and HUD grants and things like that. I figured it'd be a good kind of discussion point today. So what my goal today was going to be is kind of walk you through at a high level the three main elements that make up a grant workflow powered by Reviewr, kind of doing a side-by-side with some talking points, as well as actually diving deeper into Reviewr, doing a screen share and kind of translating how these three key areas are accomplished within Reviewr. So number one, we're going to talk through kind of the grant applicant profile. As you know, when it comes to grant management, it's not just online forms or grant applications, it's the actual data collection, the financials, the budgets, the documents, all these elements that really make up overarching a grant profile. From there, we're going to dive into kind of the review and selection process and the many elements and components that go into it. Everything from assigning the grant applications to your team, the blinding, the compliance process, and ultimately the scoring, selection, and deliberation process. And then finally, we're going to dive deeper into once the awardees are selected, what does that grant reporting and follow-up deliverables look like? So everything from centralized ongoing data capture, communications, and note-taking, then of course reporting from your perspective back to the Treasury Department or the federal level. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump into kind of a screen share, and we'll walk through these three elements directly within Reviewr. Let's get started. All right, so the first thing that we're going to look at and kind of talk about is the concept of grant applicant profiles. Now, on the left-hand side of my screen is Reviewr. It's our platform. Again, just as a really quick introduction, Reviewr is an entire grant management or grant lifecycle software intended to do everything literally from the intake of grant applications, all of the management tools that you might need. So everything from communication to reporting to workflows, and of course, the built-in review selection process, and then finally the post-awardee workflows and deliverables and grant reporting. Now, whether or not you've already kind of done grants and you've already selected the recipients and now you've moved on to the grant reporting side of things, or if you're kind of fresh at the very beginning the grant application process, there's actually a place for you within Reviewr. As I mentioned beforehand, there's three components. There's the application side of things or the profiles, there's the management tools, and then the selection process. So if you've already collected a bunch of applications or grantees, or you might even be a year into a program, we actually have an import feature as well, so you can bring those applicants into our platform. It actually creates profiles for them, and then you can kind of leverage all the additional tools and value adding benefits that we provide without collecting applications within us. Now, again, if you're at the very front end, beautiful, you can use Reviewr from literally start to finish. So we're going to hop around a little bit today. There's a lot of elements that make up Reviewr, but my goal today is to kind of focus again on those three main elements that make up an ARPA grant to be successful. So again, the first element here is going to be the grant applicant profile. Now, again, left-hand side is Reviewr. This is your kind of administrator side of things. So this is your command center. I'm going to go ahead and jump over to what we call submissions, which is going to give us a listing of all of the grant applicants or awardees that we have in our platform. And I'm going to go ahead and open up one of their profiles so we can talk a bit more about this. So again, if you think through a grant management process, there's a lot of moving pieces and elements that make up the submission and long-term awardee side of things. You have everything from the initial information about the applicant. You've got potentially short answers, essay questions. Obviously, if we're talking about grants, there's going to be financials and budgets. A lot of times we have file uploads, which could be supporting materials such as reference letters and things like that, or it could be receipts. So whatever that might be. Now, historically, you have all these elements that make up a grant profile that kind of live disconnected from one another. With Reviewr, we take all these moving parts and we aggregate them into one centralized hub, which is the grantee profile. Now, the power behind this is that profile can continue to grow and grow and grow as your program progresses from different phases or workflows, or potentially from year to year. So, it might start with an initial application, which is what the grantee submitted, but then long-term holds on to numerous file uploads. It's going to hold on to communication. It's going to hold on to kind of comments and feedback back and forth, note-taking tools, and then of course, potentially file uploads and supplemental forms, which we're actually going to talk about, because again, these profiles are intended to continue to grow. So In this example, we have Leslie Nope. She is our grantee. And this is kind of at a high level what her profile might look like. So right off the bat, this is of course dummy data. We have information about Leslie. So this is her initial grant application. And as I scroll through here, you're going to notice that there's a lot of information about her. Who she is, short answers, essays, there's some contact info. But as I keep progressing, again, this is purely dummy data, you're gonna start to get into things like reference letters, file uploads, photos, videos, grant reporting. And so the idea behind Reviewr is to kind of show you at a high level Leslie's information and then give you action items or tabs to kind of take action on what those elements might be. So off to the right, we have some communication tools. So either the review committees or it could be you guys as admins can directly communicate with Leslie, the awardee, back and forth. All that communication gets logged in within Reviewr. There's also a built-in note-taking tool. So this could be internally between you guys as admins or part of the review committee. As you're looking at Leslie's profile, you can log notes and communication that stays either private to yourself or amongst your internal staff. So use this as a way to kind of store information outside of the profile that can go into other people from your team. And then of course we have some workflows. So you can advance Leslie from January to February grant reporting or from phase 1 to phase 2, things like that. Now as I collapse this side menu, up along the top, we have all of the kind of powerful features that make up a profile. So we're going to kind of focus on probably 2 elements right here. Number 1 is attachments. So what's really powerful about this is that every single file that gets uploaded, either by Leslie or on behalf of Leslie, gets logged into this list. So in this example, we have 4 file uploads, and I can see kind of the name of the file, who uploaded it, when it was uploaded. But even better is if I click on the file itself, there's no need to ever leave Reviewr. So those documents, whether or not that's budgets or spreadsheets or video files, will actually embed themselves right in Reviewr. So you can access the files, you can leave annotations on them, you can toggle back and forth between Leslie's profile, all the file uploads, things like that. If you want to kind of leave some comments or notes, boom, there's our commenting tool. Again, the idea is to take all these elements and make up a grantee, put them into one centralized hub, and then give you all of the tools and action items that you guys need to take action on them. One last thing that I do want to look at is a brand spanking new feature from Reviewr called supplemental forms. Not going to get too deep into this. We actually have a second video slash kind of blog post introducing this feature. So if you want to go to that, let me know. It's also on our website under the resource section. But this gets used in a lot of different ways. The 2 main areas that I see it being powered by within grants or even scholarships is number 1 is this supplemental files from other people. So maybe you have reference letters being submitted on behalf of the grantee. Maybe it's a provost office submitting financial information about the applicant, things like that. So what happens is you can actually, in this case, it says reference, it's actually a supplemental form. You can click on that, and if it's coming from a third party, you put in the name and email address of who that is, what type of supplemental file it is, and then you can actually send that notification. So let's say, for example, it's going to go to a reference writer and say, dear reference writer, you've been requested to write a reference on behalf of Leslie, click here to do so. And then when they submit that, it doesn't have to be a file. It's actually a full-blown supplemental form that person can fill out. And then once they submit it, it gets appended back to, in this case, Leslie's profile. So in this example, we know that Tom Haverford submitted a supplemental file, which was a transcript on behalf of Leslie. And when I click on it, boom, there is that file upload. So that's use case number 1. Use case number 2 is probably the more powerful functionality, which is grant reporting. So once Leslie is selected as a recipient, and we're actually going to kind of jump ahead because this is the 3rd slide, what Leslie would actually end up doing is coming in here, and instead of clicking add reference, it would click add supplemental form. And maybe Leslie has to do monthly ARPA grant reporting forms. So she would click add form. She would then be presented with the full-blown grant reporting template that you want Leslie to fill out each and every month. She would fill it out, press submit, and then it would fall into this list and say, January, February, March, whatever you want to call it. It could be quarterly, it could be yearly, that's up to you. But you would just simply click on, grant reporting template number 1, and then boom, you'd see all the corresponding data within it. So again, you have Leslie's overarching profile, file uploads, communication, the actual selection results, all that kind of fun stuff. And you have a separate section now for every single supporting form that belongs to Leslie for post-awardee selection. Again, we will come back to that here in a little bit, but something to kind of to keep an eye on. So that is the grant applicant profile. The next thing that we're going to look at is the review and selection process. All right, so we're back on our dashboard here, and we're going to kind of dive deeper into like the review and selection workflows and processes of kind of assigning grant applications to your review team or to your committees or even internal staff, and then also kind of the review and selection, and also like the deliberation side of things as well. Now, this could actually have its entirely own kind of conversation and webinar behind it, which we probably will end up doing. Just because there's a lot of ways of doing this. It's a really robust kind of feature within Reviewr, but also more from like a philosophical perspective, kind of the idea behind it, and also some of the different theories and ways of assigning submissions to committees, the blinding process, compliance, proof of process, all of these types of things come into play. So today we're going to talk kind of at a high level, kind of the goals behind these different elements within an ARPA grant, and then within Reviewr, kind of the most common way that we see this being done. But of course, if you're interested in kind of diving deeper into your processes and your workflows and how that would fit within Reviewr, or is talking more some of the things that we're seeing within the space, please do let us know. So when it comes to the review and selection process, there's a couple of things that come into play. So we're just going to talk mostly from a high level, from a compliance perspective. So what we'd like to see our clients do is that have some type of public statement that says, look, if you apply for a grant or if you apply for a scholarship, as soon as you press that submit button, this is the process you're going to go through. You're going to go to a centralized platform like Reviewr. You're going to be assigned out to a team for review and selection. You're going to get reviewed up by 4 different people. We're going to narrow it down to the top 15 and move them on to a secondary review by 3 more people. When the review team is looking at you, they're going to use this scorecard and actually tell them what the scorecard is. And then of course, the idea here is that you use a tool like Reviewr that can actually back up that process. So it's like a proof of process. The second element to that is if you are going to blind the data, it's something that we're seeing a whole lot of right now, kind of in the current state of the environment, is that when the grant applicants are assigned out to a review committee, they hide potentially some either personal information or information about the awardee, or potentially they're just hiding elements that are not relevant to the review and selection process, just to avoid wasting the review team's time. So, you could hide first name, last name, demographics, then a whole bunch of mumbo jumbo that's more for internal purposes and things like that. So when the review team comes in, no longer do they see these really comprehensive and robust profiles and submissions. They really just see what they're focused on when it comes to the review and selection process, and of course, pulling back some of that personal identifying data. So that's kind of at a high level the goal behind it. Now, as far as how do you assign the grant applications to your team, that's where I kind of say that this could be its own full-blown webinar or secondary conversation. We've seen everything from individually pairing up certain applicants or certain grantees with individuals either internally from your staff or externally, and manually picking and choosing exactly who's in review who. We've seen this done by like buckets or workflows. So for example, you might have like a grant category or an entire grant phase that goes to a committee. And then when that committee is done, those submissions move on to a secondary, bucket or grouping for another committee to review. And then kind of the most popular is that hybrid approach where you have potentially multiple phases of review, but also some type of segmentation, either based off of volume or based off of categories to assign submissions to committees. And so that's actually what we're looking at here. Long story short, within Reviewr, we call it groups and divisions primarily because there could be multiple levels to this. I personally like to describe this as a bucketing process or a workflow. And it's simple yet incredibly powerful, probably one of our most powerful features in Reviewr. So to use this as an example, you might be a city that is giving ARPA grants to 5 potential different funding categories, from nonprofits to other types of individuals, things like that. So the theory here is that when somebody presses submit, our software can actually read their profile in real time and say, hey, they chose the nonprofit grant categorization. So when they submit, it's going to put them automatically into a bucket with all of the other grant applicants who chose the nonprofit category. So now you have a bucket full of submissions. The next step is, in this example, to assign that bucket to a team of review members. So again, kind of thinking bigger picture, kind of using your thinking hats here. Maybe this is done by phases. So you have all of your grant applicants in phase 1. And there's an internal team who are vetting them. And then there's a phase 2 bucket with a completely separate both set of review members, committees, and a separate selection criteria as well. So a lot of power here. What's also really cool about this is if you open these buckets up, it's going to show you what's going on. So in this example, it's going to show me my 6 grant applicants. It shows me currently how many people are in charge of reviewing them, and then who those individual review members are. Conversely, it shows me a list of my staff. It shows me how many submissions are assigned to each of them to review, and then who those applicants or those grantees are. So what this gives us the power to do is potentially some randomization. So maybe for the sake of compliance, or maybe just because the volume is so great, you can actually select all of your applicants and say, let's auto assign them to maybe no more than 6 review members, but no less than 4. So now we can ensure that by minimum, each grantee will be reviewed 4 times, but no more than 6 times to be fair and accurate. It also gives us the power to both do that randomization and automation, but then manually make some changes. So for example, if there's a conflict of interest or a staff member decides to go on vacation, you can actually pick their name individually from this list and then click on manually assign. So from here, you can pick and choose specifically what grantees or awardees belong to what committee member. So now when they log into their account, they're only going to see those submissions assigned to them. So again, very, very, very powerful feature where at a high level, we're taking buckets or groups of submissions or grantees and then giving them to your staff to conduct review and selections, or kind of peeling back the different layers of the onion and manually picking and choosing or using some automation to get really fine detail into who can see what and when. Now, again, it's important to realize that you can also have different review criteria for each of those buckets. So again, phase 1 might have its own kind of set of criteria that you're looking for, and then maybe you narrow it down to like the top 5 grantee candidates in a particular category that has a completely separate scoring selection criteria as well. So here's kind of what that might look like, and then we will log in as a committee member. So once the results start to come in, it's going to land on a page like this. So it shows you a listing of every grantee that has been reviewed. It actually will show you every single individual staff member of yours that was in charge of evaluating it. It shows you their individual scores as well as averages. So from a mathematic perspective, it actually shows you in real time from high to low who your highest and lowest evaluated applicants are. Now, as we all know, sometimes scores don't tell the full story. It's nice to have data to help power both discussions as well as kind of protect the house when it comes to audits and compliance. But a lot of times this interface will actually be shared on like a Zoom call or an in-person meeting, and they'll pull it up as a committee and say, okay, David Rose is our highest rated grant applicant. With that said, we should probably look into it deeper because based on the data, Paula gave it a perfect 100, whereas Mark gave it a 65. There's a bit of a discrepancy there. And so from this page, you can actually click view, pull David's profile. You can actually jump into the evaluation section and then look at those score sheets that got submitted, let the team kind of have those discussions and do those deliberations. And it's quite possible that now David gets bumped to number 2 or 3. And then in this example, maybe Barney gets bumped up to number 1. So again, Reviewr doesn't dictate the results. It gives you the power and the data to make informed decisions and let you guys do something with it. So kind of the last piece to this now is the actual review and selection side of things. So I'm going to go to my review listing and I am going to log in as one of my review members. Now, when your review team or your staff logs into their accounts, they're going to get what I always describe as a menu. So instructions, attachments, all that kind of stuff. And then a listing of all of the grant applicants you want them to look at. Again, what's nice about this is if you do have a blind review process, all of those personal details like their name can be hidden and they just see an ID number. So now the thought here is that your review staff can simply click on the name or the ID of the grant applicant and they get a split screen. So the left-hand side is the entire grant profile or the elements you want them to look at. And then the right-hand side, which has its own independent scrolling, is the review and selection criteria. Now, that whole right side is full-blown custom. So, whatever selection criteria you want to use, I've seen thumbs up, thumbs down, sad face, smiley face, 1 through a million, drop downs, check boxes. In this example, it's like a 1 through 5 with a comment as well as some weighted. So basically, 1 through 5, leave a comment. 1 through 5, leave a comment. And you'll notice as I click around, my point totals are actually going to reflect themselves. So the idea here is quite simple. Your review team or your staff can side by side view the profile. They can jump over to the attachments. Maybe they want to log a note to themselves or to the other committee members. They can jump back over to the profile, view the file uploads, and then once they're done, once they're ready to go, they just press submit, and then boom, they can move on to the next. So at a high level, that's kind of the ins and outs of the review and selection process. Again, this has a much bigger discussion around it, so I'm happy to kind of dive deeper into that into another call. The last thing that we're going to look at now is we've gone through the entire intake of applications and kind of managing them. We've looked at the review and selection side of things. Now we're going to dive deeper into, in this case, Leslie. Now that she's been selected, kind of what does her grant reporting and follow-up information look like, which we've already kind of touched base on. So let's go ahead and dive into the post-awardee grant reporting. All right, so here we are back looking at like an awardee's profile, back to Leslie Nope, our kind of example this entire time. And we're gonna kind of run through this relatively quickly because we've already kind of looked at it back on slide number 1. But this entire kind of process is about the post-awardee either grant reporting process or also kind of the post-awardee deliverable collection and data tracking and follow-up and approval and things like that. So the reason why I pulled this is it's a very I guess, often overlooked workflow when it comes to grant management, but also probably one of the bigger elements that makes it up. So if you've already collected your process, or if you already even ran your entire grant selection process and you're already starting this, not using Reviewr, again, you can import your applicants into our platform and actually pick up at this stage. There's a couple elements that come into play here. So number one is that once somebody is selected for a grant, typically they have to come back into Reviewr at least once, but typically monthly, quarterly, yearly, whatever your schedule, your grant schedule is, and add to their profile. Either it's reporting templates, it could be for additional fund disbursements, kind of requests and things like that. And so that's kind of what we're looking at here. So if I'm Leslie, I'd see a page very similar to this where I could either edit my profile and add to it, or I could jump into my attachment section. Maybe Leslie needs to submit every single month some type of receipts or proof of process and things like that. So she can simply come in here, click upload attachment, add the document, and then boom, it shows up here in kind of her list of file uploads. And again, from your perspective, those documents actually do get embedded into the platform. So that profile will continue to grow with all of the deliverables being requested from Leslie. More common than not, they're going to be jumping into the supplemental form section. Now, in this use case, it's kind of configured to collect references, but it would look a little bit different. And instead it'd be add form or add additional form or add supplemental form. And when they click on that, an entirely brand new form will pop up. And it could be a grant reporting template being requested from Leslie, progress to date, funds utilized, whatever it is that you're collecting from them. And at Reviewr, we actually have a couple of examples from other ARPA clients who are powering their process with Reviewr that we can kind of load up on your behalf, make things super simple. But in that workflow, and specifically some of the cities and counties that we work with, it's a monthly grant reporting for, I think, like the next 3.5 to 4 years. So Leslie would literally every single month come in here, click add supplemental form, fill it out, and then boom, once it gets submitted, it'll then fall into this interface where it could include, of course, things like file uploads, as well as kind of the free text, financials, essay questions, whatever content you need from her. But the goal here is when things are all said and done, you might have 72 months or 48 months worth of supplemental forms, including file uploads, including notes, including questions, all of that from literally right now for the next 3.5 years that are being aggregated into Leslie's profile. Now, why is that an important thing to talk about? Number one, the experience. Leslie has zero challenges or extra energy being done by her half. She goes to the same place every single month and continues to build off of that profile already created. Two, from your team's perspective, have every single piece of data that's associated with your program into one centralized hub and one centralized platform. And number three is when it comes to external reporting. So things like reporting back to the US Treasury or the federal level or even internal audit kind of reporting. Since you have all this track record, literally including results, communication, file uploads in one centralized place, that gives you all the power in the world to run whatever type of report that you need. In fact, Reviewr actually has some auto-generated reports that we can create specifically intended for the Treasury reporting requirements. So we're going to do that relatively quickly because we already kind of reviewed it earlier, but that kind of wraps up some of the main things I wanted to talk about today. Again, currently Reviewr is being used by thousands of organizations and literally running university-wide scholarships and grants to recognition awards to fellowships to government agencies running not just ARPA grants, but also just grants and scholarships in general. So we have, a decade of experience kind of with these programs. So, obviously, if you want to dive deeper into our platform and how it can work for me, that's great. I'd love to kind of discuss further. But also, if you have any kind of overarching questions from processes or workflows, please don't hesitate to let me know. But with that said, I'm going to let you go. But if you have any questions at all, please do let us know. And looking forward to kind of chatting further. Have a good one.